Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Talent Talk Live. My name is Nelly Valinden. I will be your host today, and I hope, of course, that everyone is being safe and doing well. Don't forget to say hi to us in the comments and let us know where you are watching from because we really appreciate it. As you can see, with me today is Ségolène Finet, CMO at Talentsoft. Hi, Ségolène.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Excited.
Good to hear. Me too. I'll get back to you in a minute, Ségolène, and then I'll let you say a few words about yourself, of course.
All right.
But first, for our lovely audience today, what we will be doing, we will be talking about a rebranding project that Ségolène and her team have been doing during the pandemic. And we'll look at why it made sense to do that project, what they've learned from the project, and also some of the reasons why they decided to go ahead with the project. Now, we'll be talking about that for about 15, perhaps 20 minutes. And then we'll have time to answer as many of your questions as possible. So if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share with us during this episode, don't hesitate to do so in the comments on LinkedIn. Now, that's it from my end for now. So Ségolène, back to you. And perhaps you'd like to say a few words about yourself.
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for organizing this. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Talentsoft. I've been in this role since 2013 when the company was very small. And so I feel I've had several lives here as a CMO because we've grown so much as a company. And the latest big challenge was the rebranding this year.
Okay, yes. And I actually saw something interesting that you said about branding, Ségolène, and I thought it could be a nice way to start our conversation today. And it was that you said branding is both a journey and a destination. So I'm curious to hear if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's because it's an area where I've really grown to appreciate things differently. We did do a first rebranding when I was at Talentsoft a few years ago. And at that time, I was thinking about the new brand being the objective. And we worked really hard on a new brand and a new logo and tagline and everything. But then we didn't involve the rest of the company enough in the exercise. We were trying to go fast. And so we didn't take the time to ask people about this internally or to survey customers or partners. And as a result of that, we didn't really leverage the internal know-how or external know-how. And also afterwards, we didn't enable people to really learn the new messages, use them in their daily lives, in their presentations, and so on. And so the rebranding worked, but it was a bit superficial. It didn't stick. It didn't transform the organization. So this time, with a team, with Vanessa and Anne-Sophie, and the agency, Lonsdale, we worked from the ground up. We decided to take everyone with us, as many people as possible in that journey. And so we worked with maybe 50 people to define the core messages. We interviewed people internally, both newcomers or people who had been with the company for a while. And we really tried to drill down on what makes Talentsoft different. Why did you come here to work as a candidate instead of going to another company? And then we also interviewed customers. Why did you pick Talentsoft? What really jumped out at you when you evaluated software? We interviewed analysts, the analyst community, Gartner, Forrester, Fosway, IDC. They really have a great perspective because they look at other vendors and they know what differentiates them. And so we really did this exercise internally and externally to understand why the brand is different, what we bring that's different. And it's from there that we constructed the messages. And then there's the other half, which is once you've done the new messages, the new identity, the new assets, is ensuring people internally, especially, take them, buy in. They use them, they leverage them in all their activities and everything. And so that whole process is also really important. And I think the first rebranding I think I underestimated that a little bit as well. So this time is definitely both a destination and a journey.
Thank you. And I already hear so many interesting things that I'm going to want to ask you a few questions about later in our conversation. But let's try to start at the beginning. So there was this new rebranding project. I imagine you already started to work on it perhaps before the pandemic.
Yes.
Then, of course, 2020, there's this big pandemic. All of a sudden, it's chaos pretty much all over the world, and you find yourself with this project. And then you, I imagine, have to make a decision. Are we going to continue? What are we going to do with this project? So you decided to go ahead with the rebranding during the pandemic. Can you perhaps share with us what made you and your team decide to make that decision?
Yeah, so I think it wasn't so easy to do because we had started working on it, in January, February, and then when the pandemic hit, I really had some doubts because I felt, maybe this is a bit of a vanity project, right? The world feels like it's going to pieces. Our audience of HRDs are dealing with a crisis, so is this really the right time to talk about messaging and branding and so on? And when we talked with the team, we felt a couple of things. One, I think first that during a crisis like this, and I did not make this up, actually, someone who works for one of our competitors said this to me in a call one day, and his name is Liam, and he said, what you communicate as a brand during a crisis is what people will remember. So this really hit home because I felt that it was even more important than before to be on message, that the right message in a time like this is really critical, especially because our main audience are HR directors, talent management, recruiters. So they were at the front of the crisis dealing with people, with safety issues, with people going on unemployment and everything, with real crisis, right? So giving them the wrong message would have been bad. So we felt that working on the brand, working on the messages was important and urgent, even during a pandemic. The other thing, too, is that I did not want the marketing team at Talentsoft to only work on the urgency. When we all went into lockdown, and we have people all over Europe, but most of the countries were in lockdown or, restraining activity, coming to the office and so on in early March. We had the team all over Europe, and we're all dealing with reinventing marketing. So I'm sure there are people on the call who are working in other marketing organizations, and you know how it was, right? We all had events we had to cancel. We all had seminars, dinners, all of things went out the window. We had to rethink everything. So a lot of time was spent during urgency, like what do we need to do this week, next week to get the business going? And I felt that if we only did the short-term stuff and forgot about the big picture, we would get exhausted. So that was the two reasons why we continued. One, we felt that even more than before, we had to send the right messages. So we had to tune the messages. And second, we had to give everyone some perspective. And then the third reason too, and I'm sorry if I'm being a little too long, but the third reason is I think that times of crisis are a really good moment to make change happen. And in the past, sometimes I had a tendency to be too much in the consensus, getting everybody's opinion, taking a long time to decide on the new messages, and in the end, you end up with something a little weak. And this time, at the management level of Talentsoft, people were really willing to follow us and to take risk and to be a bit bolder, because we felt like this is a time of focusing on essential things. This is a time where we're willing to just go faster and take risk and make decisions maybe a little differently. So my management committee really followed us and was able to approve a new content and the new directions very quickly, probably faster than in normal times.
Yeah, interesting. I especially find the second, so you named three reasons. I especially find the second one super interesting, where you said that it's important to, especially in these times, to also have some long-term perspective and to look beyond the things that have to happen right now. Yes, I find that very interesting.
It's key. And because if all you feel is you're dealing with one emergency after another, one urgency after another, it's exhausting. I mean, and then also when things got a little bit better. So in June and July, when the pandemic slowed down a little bit in some countries, having that new brand and having all the great new assets that came out of it, because it's very visual, it's all the new PowerPoints, the new changes to the website, the new case studies, the new videos. But for marketing teams, especially, all the new colors and messages and all the new things we could play with, that gave a lot of energy to people. I think that if after such a crisis, we had to go back to our old stuff, it would have felt really weird, like just really old. And so I think it gave people energy. At least it gave me energy, and I think it gave a lot of people energy internally to have all this new content and tools to use. And I've seen adoption level internally of all the new banners, all the new tools, all the new PowerPoint templates, going through the roof. Like people have just embraced all the new stuff. They were ready for something. And thank God we did it, because otherwise we would have come out of a pandemic. Come out of a pandemic. We're not out of a pandemic, but you know what I mean? Come out of a first phase. And I think people would have been like, what? You're giving us this old corporate presentation? This is, 2019. That's another world. That's another century. Yeah. Even now, we're not going fast enough. I think the team is probably listening to me thinking, she thinks we're done. We're not done. I know we're not done, but we've made great headways.
Yes. I would like to talk about the process a little bit, Ségolène. So you already mentioned earlier that you went through a rebranding project, of course, when Talentsoft was in an earlier stage. And you already mentioned now that this time you involved an agency. But what can you tell us about the process? How did you go about this rebranding project?
Oh, so I should really let Vanessa and Sophie speak here. But the key thing, I think, was to give ourselves a bit of time. So we work in the SaaS industry where everything has to get done for the day before, right? So, and Vanessa had told me, Ségolène, a rebranding is something that's going to take, a whole year. And I looked at her and I was like, whole year? Are you crazy? We need to do this in 3 months. But the truth is, she remembers this discussion. But the truth is, it's taken a whole year to get here. So the first thing I think that we've learned, and the first thing that helped us, is to do it step by step. Like there is no cutting corners, because if you cut too many corners, you don't listen to a voice, you don't listen to a feedback, and you don't get to real consensus. So to a strong consensus or to a strong agreement. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we decided to have an outside agency help us, because we realized that we had lost perspective. I had been with a company for a while. We were very immersed in the competitive space of HCM. There are some very strong companies we compete with strong messages. And when you're in it, it's very easy to just look at the competition and to forget the big picture. And what the agency brought is really that distance. They benchmark the competition for us, but we also looked at vendors and companies outside of our space. They asked a wider set of questions. And I was worried at the beginning that it was going to be difficult to align everyone. I was a little worried that maybe the corporate positioning was already too different, maybe between countries and even within the company, because I felt if you asked 5 Talentsoft employees what Talentsoft stands for, you get 5 answers. But what the agency did by working and talking to everyone is that they really made a reality emerge of key things, key values, key brand values that were really, I wouldn't say unified, but very common to a lot of the people. So this very strong messaging emerged from this process in a very interesting way. It really surprised me. It really came from the bottom up.
So I can already, I think, yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, and then once we had that, I felt like the battle was won, because I I thought that was the toughest thing, to get everybody to agree, even our co-founders, who have a different viewpoint on this. But once we got the central message, then everything became easier, because we could all anchor our effort on something that was on a strong foundation. So, then we worked on the visual identity, and this actually was approved very quickly, was embraced very quickly. But I think it all came back to the fact that first we got a very wide, deep agreement on the core messaging, and with a really strong link to the corporate strategy. And that we had never done before as a brand. I hope it's practical enough. Maybe it's a bit too conceptual what I'm saying. No. We also had workshops, okay? We also had lots of practical things, but that's the big picture.
Well, I think from listening to what you were saying, I think I can distill 3 key elements here. So first of all, make sure you have enough time. So take enough time for such a product. The second one is take a step back and get outside perspective, whether that comes from an agency, but make sure that you have perspective and that it's not a very narrow vision. And then the third one, which I think you said very clearly, is to make sure that you get consensus on where you're going. Exactly. So I think that's pretty practical, to be honest.
Okay. Thank you.
So this question, the next question that I wanted to ask you is linked to that. But before I'm going to ask you the question, I'm going to go back to our audience 1 second, because on my end, I have about 2 more questions for Ségolène. But if you have any questions that you would like to ask about this project, about what they learned, Ségolène and the team, anything, please share your questions or your feedback if you want to say anything about a project that you did in the comments, and we'll get to them as soon as we have finished our questions. So, so my next question would be, and I think you touched on it a little bit already, but what would you say are the most important things that your team and yourself that you learned from this project?
So, take enough time. That was definitely one. The second one, I think, is to really try to focus on the messages and the wording before you start looking at the images and the colors and all the, the wrapping around it. The third thing, and it's something we're still learning, is that the enablement piece is really major. Even in a company of only 700 people, it's still major change management, because you're asking people internally to change the way they pitch the company. And some of them might have pitched the company a certain way for 10 years and it's worked for them. So, why should they change? Then you're also asking them to spend a lot of time adapting to a new PowerPoint template, redoing everything they're doing. When you talk about the brand, you go pretty deep into the processes of a company. We have people in finance, they had to redo, invoicing formats. We have people in professional services. They had thousands and thousands of slide decks of, on the product they have to redo and everything. So internally, I realized as we were going through that, not only do you ask people to change the way they work, you ask them to spend time doing it. It's not just, oh, yes, I love a new brand. No, it's not enough to love it. You have to, change your LinkedIn banner. You have to change your pitch. You have to relearn what you've said before. So there's something that we've realized is that Anne-Sophie, who's the head of a brand for Talentsoft, her and I have had this discussion several times where, she's a graphic brand expert, but she's also a change manager. And so we went to all the different teams to explain, why is this important? And we didn't go just to the customer-facing teams. We didn't go just to the sales teams and marketing team. We went to every team, the development team, the technical team, the finance team, the HR team, because it's really, the brand is everybody's responsibility. And maybe in the B2C world, maybe if you work for Chanel or Adidas, or maybe it's more obvious, But in the B2B SaaS world, it wasn't that obvious to everyone that it was everybody's responsibility to adopt the new value, the new messages. And that's what took a bit more effort. And we're still in the middle of it. We're not done. And that's why I think that, whether or not this is a success, we'll know in a few months, too soon to tell. We love it, but the result, question mark.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point as well, to be aware of the fact that when you do a project such as rebranding in this case, that it's not just the rebranding as such, but that there's a whole process of change management indeed that you need to take into account, I guess, as soon as you start the project, because it's one thing to have a beautiful new messaging and fantastic looking visuals. But indeed, if nobody in the company is going to adapt these new messages, perhaps even this slightly different way of talking to people, to clients, then of course it's going to be very hard to make the rebranding project a success in the end. So I was wondering, indeed, because you said it's still ongoing, and of course it's still ongoing because this is something that is a really recent project. So are there any things that you have planned in terms of this change management to make sure that people are going to continue to adopt the new brand?
Yes. So we talked about this because we thought, should we be the brand police? We're like, no, we're not going to be the brand police. We're going to be the brand champion, right? So we're trying to make this a positive thing, right? Where we're giving people new cool tools to use and good training and so on. So I think that we just launched some new corporate videos and product videos, and those were major because a lot of, as you know, a lot of content now has to be via videos and not just, data sheets and brochures and so on. But one big project we have for the first half of 2021 is to completely rebrand the corporate website. We did a light rebranding today to sort of align the messages and the visuals a little bit, but we need to do more in-depth work. And then internally, we are actually adding the branding piece to the mandatory training that every new hire and every employee is going to get through. So basically, we want to make sure that everyone internally is trained on the new messages. And when I say everyone, I mean, the whole organization, from, people working in the trenches all the way to the CEO, because we feel that if you don't spend time just really honing on those messages, you don't get to the unity, to the one voice we want to get to. We want to have really a strong, unified message. And, one thing I didn't mention earlier, but one thing the pandemic did to our market and to a lot of the B2B markets is that all the communication has moved online. There's a lot of noise. There's a ton of ebooks. There's a ton of webinars. There's a ton of LinkedIn Live. And so to emerge, you really need to have a super simple, clear message. And if you think of a really strong B2C brand, they have a very strong message, and it's them talking after one or two sentences. And so that's what we're striving for. We didn't know it ahead of a pandemic, but now we're realizing that it's even more important than ever, because the conversation is, otherwise your conversation is getting drowned.
Yeah, it's getting, exactly. Especially in these times with so much messaging, etc., happening online. Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the other things I was wondering about is, this project, of course, is actually, you're still in the middle of this, of making this project a success, of course. But if we want to share perhaps some learnings with our audience, so let's say in a few years from now, you're going to go to another major rebranding project at Talentsoft. Are there already things that you have, made a mental note about saying, okay, that next time perhaps we would do differently, if anything, of course?
Oh. Well, I think you're never really done with this, right? When you look at top brands, the brands that you as a consumer recognize instantly. I mean, this is a 10 to 15-year process, right? If you think of, Apple, for example, or any brand like this. And so we're far from being at that level, right? I think if, as time allows, what I'd like to do too is ensure that the branding is also reflected, is also very much in line with the product. And that's something we started doing this time, meaning that we involved our UX design team in the process, but we're not yet at the level of, an Apple where every asset of a brand, like even the little notice on the, earpod box, looks like an Apple notice. So I think that I can't even think of a rebranding until we go through that route of really ensuring that all the pieces of a puzzle are in place. So, for example, I talked about the website, but there are other things in the content that we're working on. We realized, for example, that our product positioning was really well tuned to the new brand because we have a product marketing team that is very strong, and that was able to work with us closely on this. But then we realized that on the service front, and Talentsoft has several hundreds of people who work in the service arm, who are in charge of customer care, customer support, who help customers deploy the application. We realized that our messages there, our positioning there, wasn't as differentiated as it should be. So the first half of 2021, we're going to focus on the service positioning. So you build, it's like building blocks, right? We did the foundation, but we're not done with the house. There's a lot of additional building blocks to build to really have a super strong corporate brand. So I think it's still the beginning. I can't think of another rebranding. I want to finish this one first. So it's already pretty ambitious, I think.
Yes, great answer, by the way. I think one last question coming from me, Ségolène, and you touched on it a little bit as well already, but it's of course important to involve many different teams, many people within the organization for the adoption of the rebranding. Of course, it's important that everybody is involved. But as for the rebranding project itself, what teams would you say are very important to involve in the project?
Well, definitely.
So you mentioned, for instance, that product marketing, but
Product marketing was absolutely key, and we worked really well together. And I'm so grateful that they spent time with us, because I think that the way the corporate message aligned with the product vision, that's something we really wanted to have. We wanted to make sure this was done, because in the past, sometimes we had a corporate message that was very aspirational, and then the product message was more practical, and there's a big gap between the two. And this time, our corporate messaging, which is all about transformation, transforming organization one talent at a time, it's aspirational. We believe strongly that the way organizations evolve is by first developing their people, all of them, okay, not just a pool of high potential, but everyone. But then the proof of that message is in the product. Then product marketing talks about how we can use talent management to make teams stronger, or how we can use talent management to help manager coach employees, or how we can use our software to do talent planning and reskill people, especially right now. So that link between the corporate messaging and the product proof points was really critical. And I'm really glad we got there this time. And after that, I have to tell you that every team has their own energy and thinking process to bring to this. We got all the sales leadership in each country to critique and give feedback on the corporate presentation, for example, because in the past, the corporate presentation and messaging had been a bit too French-centric, a bit too conceptual. And so this time, the team took the time to go talk to our head of sales in Germany, our head of sales in the Nordics, in Benelux, and really get their feedback, their real feedback on this, so that the messages could be European and not French-centric. So I think it's really a matter of opening up a discussion and not be too inward focused as a marketing team, but really go and get that feedback, whether you like it or not, because sometimes the feedback is hard to hear. Sometimes you love a slide or you love a concept, and someone says, "Oh, in Germany, we don't believe in artificial intelligence. We think, you think, artificial intelligence is is an issue with data privacy. We don't want to bring this forward. And so you're like, oh, wait, how do I adapt the message and everything? So it's not always easy to get the feedback. And even now, it's half enablement, half hearing feedback. We adapt as we go. But I think that's the way the team did it. And I'm really proud that they did that, because I think it makes the result much stronger.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was going to say that's the thing with feedback, right? Feedback is not always easy to receive. Yeah. But I think it's probably an art, the art of receiving feedback. But I mean, it's definitely
yes.
But it's of course super valuable, especially as like Talentsoft, you're operating in different countries, so it's super important to get feedback from different people in different countries.
It was key. Yeah. It was key. Yes. And it's not always easy. Yeah.
No, definitely not. I have a question here from the audience, which I'll share with you. And it's a good question. It's, when you look back 1 or 2 years from now, what will be the major success indicators for the new brand? Yeah, and what are the key factors that would make it a long-term success? Yeah, it's a good question from Joe.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that some more larger companies, they have, they do brand measurements where they hire agencies that, really measure, the brand visibility and the strength of a brand. We can't really afford that kind of very quantitative studies as a space, but we are measuring the visibility of a brand a little bit differently. We're measuring it with our impact on social media, the level of engagement. We also are measuring our business, the impact on the business objectives. So, for example, how many RFP, requests for proposals, we're getting in new markets, how many requests for demos or for information are we getting from prospects and customers. So we're looking at brand as on its own in terms of, visibility and impact, but also we're looking at the business impact. Because the goal in itself is not to be visible just to be visible, right? The goal is to be visible so that more people want to look into our product, discover it, and maybe buy it. So we're trying to measure on both fronts. And then I think, too, that there are other areas where we can get measurable feedback. We work very closely with the business analysts, so Gartner, IDC, Forrester, Fosway, and so on. And our positioning on their reports and grids is also a good way to know if the positioning, corporate level and product level positioning, are on target or not. Because depending on how successful you are there, you move up in those targets. And then I think that indirectly, also the adoption we get from customer could help us assess whether or not the new messages are successful. We're thinking of doing in a year or so a survey among our customer base on how we communicate with them and the messages we send. And I'd be very interested to see if we see evolution there in just in a year or so. But it's a tough question. I think it's a tough one because we don't have, we don't have the same kind of measurements, and maybe we should. Maybe sometimes I wonder if we should invest in like a real, brand impact measurements. But I'm afraid the price tag is a bit high for us.
And so maybe, to wrap up this episode, Ségolène, for you personally, what would for you be okay? But if that's the case, then for me, this is a massive success. I mean, it already is a success on so many levels, of course, this rebranding project. But like, let's say 2 years from now, for you personally, when would you say, okay, wow, but this is just mega success?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I think that the biggest compliment is the visibility. We can't travel today, right? But we what we hear today from our sales managers in the field is, Ségolène, I'm in Norway. Nobody knows about Talentsoft in Norway. I go to a deal, I go to meet with an HRD. He doesn't know what Talentsoft is. I think the biggest success would be if in a year or two, that that same sales manager, whether it's in Norway or Switzerland or Italy or Spain, comes back and says to me, wait, I can't talk to this customer, and they knew about Talentsoft and they knew what we stood for. They didn't just know the name, they knew what we stood for. I think that would be the real success, is for to be known and understood by our audience all over Europe and maybe even Canada.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a beautiful answer. Yeah. Okay, well then, Ségolène, unfortunately, our time is up, and we are going to have to wrap up already. I mean, I could have talked about this for at least another half an hour or more, but thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing, your experience with this rebranding project. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yes, it's fun.
Nice. I want to thank you as well. And then I'm talking to our audience. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you want to read more about this rebranding project, then we'll share the link to Ségolène's article about it in the comments. So feel free to take a look at it. And then you'll also see a very nice video. And then, stay safe. And then I hope to see you very soon for a new episode of Talent Talk Live. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.